So, an interesting and fairly surprising, or at least surprising to me, watch in front of us today. The condition is not perfect. Some helpful fellow has gone and drilled a couple of holes in the dial, and it's barely legible even under the floodlights that I use for filming. So we're going to need to do a full restoration on this. Now, the surprising part, and the part that I believe to be horologically significant, is the movement in this watch. It was actually the first movement to leave Earth. It's the first watch in space. Indeed, it's exactly the same as the one that was in Yuri Gagarin's Sturmanskie Type II. So it came as a surprise to me because I didn't think you could find that movement outside of Sturmanskie, but when I removed the back of this watch, well, there it was. Now, this is Gagarin's watch. This is what the dial and handset looks like on his watch. This is what the movement looks like. And they made quite a few modern reproductions of this, normally containing a movement like this polyot you see on screen. Certainly that I know of, none of the modern reproductions had the fit and general finish of this absolutely gorgeous movement you can see here. Now, at this point in the process, I had a couple of questions about this. The first one was, how did the movement from a Russian Air Force officer's watch get into this Russian sport watch? And the other question I had was, what were the differences between the two? Do they have different markings? Were they changed at all? So the first question is quite simple to answer. Basically, this watch movement was a product of the first Moscow watch factory, which supplied both Sportive and Sturmanskie, or maybe supplied is the wrong way to say it. The first Moscow watch factory, to a certain extent, was a little bit like Swatch, one big umbrella, many brands. And like Swatch, they had the high-end stuff and the low-end stuff. This movement most certainly would have been on the high end of what they produced. I've never seen anything from the first Moscow watch factory that was as good as this. I'm not saying they never created anything as good as this, but to me this is the best they have to offer, partly because it is just so fantastically well made, and partly because of the significance of it being the first watch movement in space, which to me, a bit of a space nerd, is just super cool. As to what the differences between the movements were in the civilian version, in the sport version, and the one produced for Russian Air Force officers, there aren't any. This was not a 90% Ibush movement like ETA might make, ETA. This was a finished movement that, as far as I can tell, the Russian Air Force just swiped a few off the production line when they needed them, changed the dial and handset, and pretty much called it a day. So you'll see when I'm going through the disassembly of this, a 6-digit serial number you can see in the top right there, and a date code, in this case the second month of 1956. Now, I've seen a lot of people online say that the military version does not contain the date code, but this is incorrect as far as I can tell. The manufacturer, the first Moscow watch factory, stopped adding the date on this particular movement after 1957. So if you don't have a date, it just means the watch was produced after 1957. There are also a couple of minor variations of this movement, but you'll find those in both the Sport and the Sturmanskie. So the other question you might want to know is, why don't I just buy a Sturmanskie? Right? I'm a big kind of space nerdy guy, and also I love this movement. I knew about it before I bought this watch. I just didn't realize I could have it in anything else. So one of the reasons I don't buy a Sturmanskie is it's probably one of the most faked Franken watches out there. Now, I live in a part of the world that's an ex-Eastern Bloc country. I live in the Czech Republic at the moment, and if I walk down the street, I'll basically see tourist shops selling Praha Drinking Team t-shirts, Pilsner Urquell mugs, and Yuri Gagarin's watch. They're all fake, or at the best, Franken watches. Now, I went through around 10 pages of eBay listings, not just 10 listings, but 10 pages of listings, searching for Gagarin's watch, and I couldn't find a single example that I would be comfortable to put in my own collection and go, okay, this is an original Type II Sturmanskie. So most of them were Franken watches. They contained the 15 jewel Sturmanskie movement. A lot of them contained this movement, but it's impossible to tell if it came from a sport or a Sturmanskie, unless, of course, I guess the Russian military would keep a database of serial numbers, but I certainly don't have access to anything like that. So finding an original Sturmanskie is, Type II one at least, is quite challenging. Now, because these are sold all over Eastern Bloc countries to tourists, they've been faking them for years. We found, with a friend of mine, we went through some old stuff, and we found fakes from the 1980s. So even if you find an old looking one that looks original, and you might think to yourself, why would somebody fake an old Russian watch? Well, they definitely have been doing it. In order for me to put one in my collection, I would require provenance. I'd want it to come from the family of a Russian military officer that would have been given it at flight school. Now that's just me. Maybe you'll get lucky on eBay and find one, but the prices are also another factor for why I don't have one. Now, I've seen some originals that I was pretty sure are actual originals, and these have gone over $1,000. I've seen some for sale on various websites with dealers I trust for around the $700-800 mark. And in this business, the second-hand watch business, the vintage watch business, you're buying the seller as much as you are the watch. So many fakes and Franken watches out there. Kind of difficult to know what you're getting into, especially with a watch like this. Like I say, it's easier to find a fake one of these than it is to find a fake Rolex Submariner. One of the things that makes this watch so cool is the parts that are coming out right now. So this watch hacks, this movement hacks, should I say, and if you're not sure what that is, it basically stops the second hand of the watch when you pull the crown out. Now, most mechanical watches, or at least of this time period, didn't feature a hack. It was more a military thing. I think Hamilton holded their patent on it, or they used to, at least before they were purchased by this watch group. And I also believe that they freely let everyone manufacture this particular piece of technology into mechanical watches during the Second World War. Now, it might not have been mission critical to have atomic clock levels of perfect accuracy, but if you've seen old war movies when soldiers synchronize watches, they'll do it by stopping the second hand at 12 o'clock, all setting exactly the same time, and then all starting their watches at the exact same moment, thus synchronizing the time between that group of soldiers. Now, I've never been in a pitched battle, but I certainly wouldn't want to be charging over the hill 10 seconds early like me and Billy No Mates to face the entire front of the enemy because my watch was slightly out of time. So hacking on military watches back in the day was a fairly essential function, and probably one of the reasons that the Russian Air Force picked this particular movement to use for Russian flight school officers. So this, back in 1950, by the way, was high technology. This was not something you would find on an average wristwatch, even an average Swiss wristwatch. So again, it's just one more thing that makes this particular movement super cool, to have that hack function. And even in modern times, it does aid with setting the time, although, you know, accurate timekeeping and mechanical watches don't really go hand in hand. The best mechanical watches money can buy will still be plus minus a second or so, even a few seconds out per day, compared to a good quartz that could be a second or two out per year. So while the hack is no longer necessary really to synchronize your watch or to set better time, it is a convenient thing to have. My modern Hamilton has one, and it's just, again, it's another example of why I love this movement so much. So we're coming up on the end of the disassembly, and I just thought I'd show you a sense of scale for those of you who perhaps don't watch so much watch content. But there's one of the screws from this watch in the palm of my hand. The other thing with this particular video, I have to apologize if some of the shots are maybe a little bit out of focus and I haven't done such a good a job as I would have liked. Maybe not even as good a job as I normally do. Like you see my hand a little bit there in shot. And that's because this watch is going to a friend of mine as a gift. Although, as I said before, I did buy this movement unseen. So when I opened it, he almost didn't get it. Kind of wanted to keep it, but now I know about it, of course, I can acquire another one. But this came in the post 2 weeks late, and I have basically one full day to finish the entire restoration of this watch, service the movement, refurbish the dial, relume the hands, clean up the case, everything. So if the filming seems a little bit rushed, that will be why. So the movement is completely disassembled now, and I'm going to show you what it all looks like, every single part of it, for the real kind of watch nerds like me out there. You can see it all go into cleaning baskets where it's going into an ultrasonic cleaner. Now, a couple of things will need to happen in addendum to this before it goes into the cleaner. The balance cock holding the balance complete will need to go back in the watch. There we go, just so the hairspring doesn't get tangled during the cleaning. And the mainspring will need to come out of the barrel complete. So I'm going to push that down, and this time I have a little bit of pegwood with Radico on it, Watchmaker's Blue Tack, just because in the last video you might have seen I managed to launch the top of the barrel up to join Gagarin on his historic flight. So I would recommend, or at least I use a bit of pegwood now with some Radico on to secure the top of that barrel. Now the spring is pretty easy to get out. You just walk it from side to side. You don't want to try and spring this out all at once. You'll stand a very good chance of damaging or even snapping your spring. So there's the barrel complete, the barrel arbor, the barrel lid, the barrel itself, and the main spring. And now all of this is going to go into a fairly bog standard ultrasonic cleaner. Just a cheap Chinese job. I think I paid about $60 for it. The only thing I do use in cleaning is Elmer waterless cleaning and rinsing agent. This agent is fantastic. I'll link it in the comments below. It does a really nice job of cleaning and leaves the surface prepared for oiling, and it's designed for use in an ultrasonic, so it's absolutely superb. Now I've got the spring cleaned, and in fact the whole movement cleaned, I need to wind the spring back up. I'm using some antique watch winders. These I found on eBay. They cost me about $90, I think, maybe 90 euros, some $110, and they're absolutely fantastic. I have some of the Chinese ones, but they're very caliber specific, and I haven't found that much use in them in vintage watch restoration. Now, I haven't really tried much because in my case, I looked for a vintage set of winders for quite some time, couldn't find one at the right place, ordered the Chinese set, and then on the very next day, of course, a vintage set came up for sale, which I ended up buying. So the Chinese ones are good. They have steel arbor cranks in them, these particular ones. I know some of the earlier ones use brass, which is no good. It's not strong enough. But the modern Chinese ones seem to be okay. I just don't use them. I would generally recommend, if you're into vintage watch repair, get some vintage watch winders. These came as a set of 8, I believe, in various different sizes. So winding the spring up's no problem. Getting the spring out can be tricky, so I use a pair of tweezers here just to make sure it's held down. You don't want to ping the spring. Now this is unfortunately a Russian T-hook mainspring. You can see the little hook on the end there, which means it has to go back in the barrel with that hook sticking through the bottom of the barrel. So I mark my tool with a little black spot, line the little black spot up, and plunge the spring in, and hopefully that puts the end of the hook through the hole in the bottom of the barrel. Now, the Russian T-hook is not the most beloved way to do this in the watch community, but it's not that complicated. Now, I oiled the bottom of the barrel a little bit. I actually over-oiled it, so I won't show you me oiling the bottom of the barrel. I did clean it up before I put the spring in, and I'm going to put a bit of oil on the top. This is actually not oil, it's grease, Moebius 8200, I believe. But when that's back together, you've got to get the barrel arbor back in, and from there you've got to get a lid back on the barrel. Now, I genuinely hate this bit. I use a staking block so I can get the barrel arbor, the the pivot, if you like, of the bottom of the barrel arbor. I can get that down and rested and seated nicely, but this bit for me has always been a pain. Now, getting the lid of the barrel back on, quite simple. You can buy these little plastic presses, and what they do is they make sure that the barrel lid is pushed down with an even pressure all around. I own about 3 of them, can't find them anywhere. So I simply designed and 3D printed one for this video. I'm sure mine will turn up, but with that in, easy peasy, we will get on with the reassembly of this movement. So I'm going to start by putting the hack back in. Now, one of the issues you'll have with vintage watch repair, especially if you're not a professional, which I am most certainly not, frequent viewers to the channel will know that I am more of a watch collector than a watchmaker, or I am kind of training at the moment to become a watchmaker. Hopefully I will attend some schools, I've read some books, done some classes, but I'm hoping to get better and better as time goes on. So that hack goes back in, and now I'm going to fit this rather unusual kind of double layered escape wheel. But as I was saying, part of the problem with vintage watch repair is you're going to be working normally on a different movement every single time. So getting them apart and back together again can be quite tricky, because obviously you have no experience with what goes where. You do get better over time, but it still can be a bit of a bugbear to fix something you've never worked on before. Whereas if you are into more modern watches, you'll tend to specialize, or at least some people do, in ETAs, Rolexes, whatnot. So you're used to doing the same movement over and over again. I've never even had one of these in my hands before today, so we're going to do our best to get it back together. So I've just put the barrel bridge back on, and I've made a mistake. So this is the set lever screw. It needs to fit under the barrel bridge, so it's going to have to come out. The barrel bridge is going to have to come off, and then the set lever screw is going to have to go in with the barrel bridge on top. So a little bit of oil for our set lever screw. Now, I like to leave the mistakes in these videos. Like, I'm not pretending to be an expert here by any stretch of the imagination. And I think it's good for people to see that you can do this, I can do this. Like, if you want to give this a go, give it a go. Mistakes are going to happen, right? What's the expression? The man that never made a mistake never made anything, right? So that mistake's quickly corrected. It's quite often that the set lever screw will need to go under the barrel bridge. So luckily enough, I caught it. I have had occasions before when I haven't. And I also notice as I'm screwing these screws down that they've got a little bit of residue on them, probably from where they weren't dried properly after coming out the ultrasonic. Maybe for some other reason, I'm not sure, but can be easily polished up with a bit of rudder coat. So now the barrel bridge is on, we turn our attention to the crown wheel here, then the ratchet wheel, then the click, and a little bit of oil will go on. Now, I'm not going to show every step of the oiling. It's actually quite difficult to do and film. As I've said in previous videos, I'm working on it. Unfortunately, my budget for these videos is not humongous, so as much as I would like to have a proper microscope with camera that I could actually film this on, I'm getting there. But like I say, the budget in this economy isn't huge. So, you know, I think I show enough, and hopefully I'm getting a little better at filming these now. So the crown wheel goes back on, and it's got this kind of double screw arrangement instead of one single reverse threaded screw in the middle like you might be used to seeing. I actually quite like the double screw arrangement. Now I'm going to check with a bit of pegwood that that spins freely, and I'm going to turn my attention to the click and the click spring. Now, the reason I put this on before the ratchet wheel is the ratchet wheel can put some tension on this and send the spring flying. You can see here again where I'm putting a little bit of oil because that click will wear on that metal part of the movement. You can even see that it's worn some of the plating off. Now it looks like the click there is dusty and quite dirty, but it's some imperfection in the metal that I simply wasn't able to clean up. So the click will go on and then the ratchet wheel will go on. So if you don't know, it's the click and the ratchet wheel that make the clicking noise. When you wind a mechanical watch, you'll hear a click, 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 click. That's the ratchet in action catching hold of the wheel as the wheel goes past and making that clicking noise. Now the ratchet wheel can be quite tricky to get on, sorry, because it's square, as you can see there. So a little bit of pegwood just to knock that down and then get that screwed on. This movement is also kind of unusual because it's built on 3 levels instead of 2, so the train of wheels will actually go partially on top of the barrel bridge, and then the train of wheels bridge will go on top of all that, giving it sort of 3 tiers instead of the more normal 2, especially for a watch that doesn't have any complications. Now I think part of the reason it was done like that was simply because of the hacking motion. So the wheel that just went on was the intermediate wheel, and the one in the center is the center seconds wheel. If you noticed, it has a very long pivot. That's because that will drive the second hand on the other side, will actually be directly connected to that. Now the trainer wheels bridge goes on, and while I never try and edit these videos to make myself look better at this, I do kind of speed this bit up. The trainer wheels bridge can be a pain. You have to make sure that all the pivots drop into the jewel holes in the watch. If you push down too hard, if you try and do this too fast, give it a bit of welly, you can end up bending those pivots. So when you've got the bridge properly seated, I like to make sure with the magnification check that those pivots are coming through those jewels. I'll then screw the bridge down sort of at 80% tightness, just to make sure I'm not going to, crank it down as hard as possible and end up bending a pivot. So after I've got the screws in, I normally do a test to make sure all of the wheels are running nice and freely. You don't want any binding up in there. It could be a sign that you're crushing a pivot. So after that, I'll use a bit of pegwood on the barrel complete, the first wheel, to move everything around and check everything is moving. The escape wheel, the intermediate wheel, the center seconds wheel, all the wheels. After this, I'm going to want to put the pallet fork and pallet bridge in, just to ensure that those wheels can no longer move freely, because I don't want to wind power into the watch and have the wheels just go into a complete free spin. So pallet bridge is going on now, and again, we're going to check the pivot just to make sure it's also coming through before we tighten that bridge down. If you do bend a pivot, I believe there are ways to straighten them out. There are tools to help you do this. I don't have them, and I certainly don't have the skill to use them. So I've wound a little bit of power into the watch, and I do mean a little bit, just a couple of twists, and I'm just going to make sure that my pallet fork jumps nicely backwards and forwards, indicating there's some power getting to it. I'll flip the watch to the dial side, and I've made a little bit of a mistake. I fitted the Canon pinion off camera, and I can't get it off without removing the center seconds wheel, which would require me to remove the train bridge, which I'm not going to do, as I mentioned, I'm in a bit of a rush with this one. But you can see me fitting a Canon pinion, and any of my other watches, basically you just drop it in there, so you didn't really miss a lot. Now I'm going to get on with the keyless and motion works here. Just a little bit of oiling where there's metal and metal contact, a little bit of grease. I can list the oils I use in the description below. And this is one of my favourite parts of this watch, the Breguet teeth. They're on pretty much all keyless works. So the keyless works, for those of you who aren't aware, are how you wind and set the watch. They're the interface, if you like. So before this, with a pocket watch, you would have to carry around a key, sometimes even 2, one to wind the pocket watch and one to set the pocket watch. Now, Patek Philippe will tell you that they invented the keyless works for a wristwatch, and this is mostly true. There are a lot of watchmakers that had a hand in it. In fact, the teeth that join the sliding and winding pinions together are called Breguet teeth, so draw your own conclusions from there, really. It's a fantastic thing, though, to be able to wind and set a watch via the crown and winding stem, as opposed to, having a pocket full of watch keys. Very inconvenient. So the sliding and winding pinion of what's gone in there, what contains the Breguet teeth, and the yoke will go on top, and this will allow that sliding pinion to slide backwards and forwards to set the watch from winding mode to setting mode. Now, the yoke spring, an old enemy of mine when I first started, this was probably the bit that I lost more than anything else. It will ping, it is under a lot of tension, of course it is a spring, so I'm securing it here with a bit of pegwood. You might have seen in my other videos that I normally would use a bit of plastic, but I'm getting a little more confident in my ability now. But if you are starting out, the plastic trick, just put a piece of plastic over the top and work through the plastic. It works great. So on goes the cover plate for this lot. It's covering our minute wheel and various parts of our intermediate wheels in our keyless works there. It's covering the minute wheel from the motion works, and it also has an integrated setting jumper in it that interfaces there with a set lever. Now, when I put this one screw in, it didn't really seem to sit right in the hole, so I'm going to put both screws in, which is not something I do, and I tighten the other one down first, and as I tighten this one, you can see that go down properly. Now we can test the difference between the setting and winding mode. We can test the keyless works here, and you can see those parts jump between winding the watch and setting the watch, and it all seems to be working just fine. It's buttery smooth. Obviously I can't let you guys experience that, you'll just have to take my word for it, but when I got this watch it was crunchy. Now there is an Inca block setting on the bottom here, a shock setting. It's what stops your balance staff pivots from snapping, but I'm going to do the exact same thing on the top Inca block setting, so I'll just skip that and we'll get to it in a second. Now there's one cap jewel to be done here for the train of wheels bridge, and it's worth noting at this point as well that it's currently about 5 o'clock and I'm supposed to be at my friend's birthday dinner at 6 o'clock, and this is where we are with this watch. So I might skip a little bit towards the end. I'm going to try and get everything in the video, of course, but I'm kind of at this point in a little bit of a rush. I do not think I'm going to make dinner on time. And this is not a YouTube suspense thing. This is not a let's see how it all turns out. This is genuinely, this thing, as I said, turned up 2 weeks late, and my backup plan was a bottle of scotch, but kind of have to say that I watched the news last night, so I ended up drinking some of the scotch, and now I am in a super rush. So the cap jewel goes on nicely, the balance wheel's going in here connected to the balance cock, and we're going to see if this thing spins up, because we could have absolute disaster here. If it doesn't spin up, I just don't have the time to troubleshoot it. So after a little bit of teasing, it does spin up. There's my excellent camera work there with the thing halfway off the screen. You'll have to forgive me. But as you can see, by eye, the amplitude, the speed at which it's going backwards and forwards, looks very, very good to me. Now, it might be difficult to see on camera, but once you've seen a few of these in the real world, this looks like it has excellent amplitude, which is a giant relief to me, because as I say, I just don't have the time to troubleshoot this before I have to shoot out to dinner. Now, I will be taking this watch back from my friend at some point to do a final regulation of it and everything, because I definitely won't have time for that. But by eye, we are looking good. So I am super pleased at this part of the process. I might actually be going with a gift, which would be very nice. I still have to clean that top ink block, but I'm going to turn my attention now to the dial, because it's a disaster. So I really have no idea how to do this. Now, the machine I just put on the screen is a dial foot repair machine, but I can't use that because I've got two whacking great holes in the dial, thanks to some ingenious watchmaker that decided that putting 2 holes in the dial would be good. So I'm going to take some correct gauge enameled copper wire, and I'm going to try and solder it to the dial with a traditional soldering iron. Now this is not the correct way to solder to the dial. There's actually dial foot soldering machines. I don't have one, so I'm trying this and it's a disaster. I probably would have been better using solder paste. This is not going to work at all. Solder paste probably will, but I was worried that it would wick through on the copper wire to the front of the dial. So I am going to get the solder paste out. This is not something I have for watchmaking. This is something I have for surface mount soldering. So I'm going to use 2 blobs of solder paste and just heat that up. Now my solder paste is a bit old, so it looks a bit grainy, but it's stuck on there like an Alabama tick, and that's going to have to do. Really, that did create a very good connection between the feet and the back of the dial. Unfortunately, what I thought would happen did happen, and some of that solder wicked through. So before I clean that up, I'm going to take the job of these numerals. Now the sandpaper I have on this bit of pegwood is about 2000 grit, which is basically polishing paper. It might even be 3000 grit, I can't actually remember, but it's a very, very low grit polish, so I can polish these numerals up so you can actually tell the time on this watch. Now I might also take the time to strip the loom pips on this, but it would have to be done underwater and it's a pain, so I'm going to ask my friend exactly what he wants done. Now I'm using some relief paint here. I'm just getting a colour match at the moment. I'll do some more cleaning up before I do the final thing, but we'll see that at the end. Again, I did a little bit more of a lax job on filming than I normally would because genuinely, as I said, I am in a rush. So it's time to clean the top Inca block setting of this watch. It's the same as the bottom setting, which is why I didn't show both. But basically the spring comes up, then the jewel and the jewel housing, which will come up probably in one piece like that on a piece of Radico, come out. The jewel gets cleaned, the housing gets cleaned in Bergeron B-dip, then a dot of oil goes on, both of the pieces go back together and then back in the setting. Then all you have to do is close the spring. It's not a difficult operation. It probably looks a little more difficult than it is if this looks difficult to you. But in reality, this is a joy compared to having a non-ink block setting. So here's again an example of when I'm in a rush. I actually went back and checked all this, but the filming's a little scuffed just because it's really difficult to get the cameras in position to film these shots, and I am being shouted at from the other room at this point that we have to go. So there is the movement back together. As I say, amplitude does look good by eye. I will stick it on a Timegrapher before the end of the video, I assure you. And the dial goes on. Now the paint at this point is still wet, so those dots on the front of the dial are quite visible, but you'll see it in a second when it's dried. Under heavy magnification you can actually see it. With a naked eye at the end, when it's dry, you can't see it. If somebody points it out to you and you squint a lot, you could maybe see it, but it's pretty decent by naked eye. Now it's at this point where I completely forgot I needed to reloom the hands, and hand loom takes about 4 hours to dry, depending on the loom, the viscosity and whatnot, but it takes several hours. So I'm actually going to bake these hands in the oven. I know, you can comment down below if you like. I've never done it before. I don't know if it's going to work, but I cannot turn up with a watch with the loom dripping off the hands. So I'm going to try and put this in the oven for half an hour. It does say on the loom instructions, this is Bergeron loom, that you can heat it up. And at this point in the process, it is 20 to 7 and dinner was at 6. So I'm already going to be Mr. Super Popular when I turn up. So it's in the oven for these bad boys, and hopefully they don't drip, run or otherwise explode. So you can see the hands going on here. I think that the orange, they wouldn't have originally been orange, but I'm not the world's biggest fan of Fauxtina. I don't mind it too much, this sort of off-white fake old look, so I thought this orange would look super cool on the black. And you can see there the dots at 11 and 5, even under this heavy magnification, are simply not that visible now they've dried. Now, there are better ways of doing that. The Timegrapher results are there as well. We're plus 38 seconds a day, plus 34 seconds a day. I can tell you I regulated that in to about plus minus 5 or 6 seconds. So this movement, fantastic, as I think everybody knew it would be. The dial, super legible, really happy with the look of this one. The movement, first watch movement in space, I mean, for me, it doesn't get much cooler than that. And here it is in the box with the time, which is right now 7 o'clock, as I jump out for dinner. Thanks for watching.